seen it that even though it is unbelievable to me that people run 26.2 miles, there is, I couldn't run that far if someone was chasing me. There is apparently a group where they're called the Boston Yo-Yo, and their thing is that they start at 3 in the morning. They run from Boston to Hopkinton, and then they turn around and run the full marathon. So they do 52.4 miles before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that is just completely beyond me. I feel like a complete slouch, and clearly nothing I am doing meets that standard. But anyway, I am always sort of reflective about, I love the marathon. My first child was actually born on marathon day. And obviously, since 2013, what continues to strike me is, as awful as that day was, how people in Boston have really come together to make it a day of peace and understanding. Here in Middlesex County, where some of the events unfolded in Watertown, and then with Officer Collier at MIT, we saw in that immediate aftermath how it caused people to blame people, to look differently at certain people, and the whole turnaround to the day of service has really changed that as people come together to do that. So, and that really speaks to our task force. I mean, we live obviously in a very polarized and uncertain time, and it continues to reinforce to me how important education is and prevention in terms of reducing these things, um, growing understanding and respect. And that's become just so much more critical. And one of the ways I think that we have an obligation to do that, and I've talked a little bit about this before, is, we are going to get to a place very soon, hopefully, where the pendulum will swing a little bit the other way. But if you think right now about a child who's 15 or 16 years old, for the time that they have been sort of aware of the world around them, the examples they have been seeing from everyone have not been the best. And those kids are going to be our jurors, they're going to be our voters. And I really feel that we have an obligation to be teaching them better. And that was the genesis of us creating a couple of our programs, one of which is our Empowering Citizens program. And that program was born from a book, which, if you haven't read, I really commend to you. It's about 100 pages. It's a really quick read, which is called The Bill of Obligations. And it's written by Richard Haass, who you probably see on MSNBC all the time. He is the former president of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the basis for that is, we all know in the Bill of Rights, we have 10 rights, and kids know all their rights about, I can speak and you can't search me and you can't do all of these things. But he puts out the idea that we also have 10 obligations if you're going to live in a society. And they are to do things like voting, being involved, helping other people, really contributing and not just taking from society. So we had Dr. Haass in October when we launched the program come and talk to the kids. It was just really amazing. I thought the scariest part of the day was going to be, we told the kids they couldn't have their phones, but they got past all of that. It really just got so engaged in that conversation. And we had a day full of speakers for them. And then the second day, which was just a couple of weeks ago, we had the kids come together to really say, you're only 15 or 16, but you can start being a good citizen right now. And we had people come and talk about the things that they do. And we asked the kids at the end of that to commit, kind of riffing on Hamilton. You're in the room and you're going to take the pen and write your name on this, to agree to 3 things that they could do before the end of school that would help to make them better citizens, whether it was working at a food pantry, going to some kind of a town political meeting, the Board of Aldermen or town meeting or one of those things, to see how government works. So we have a whole crew of kids who've committed to that. When they verify that they've done those things, we will give them a lot of good swag, as well as the letter that for that college application of how they've become a good citizen. So we're looking forward to really seeing what the kids have done. And the second piece is, we had a couple of weeks ago, we had our annual Empowering Girls program. You know, as the only woman in Massachusetts who is a district attorney, I feel a special obligation to bring women together. You can't be what you can't see, and to have them look at jobs that they haven't thought about. So we had folks like Kerry Kennedy came to talk about running the Robert and Ethel Kennedy Foundation. We had an opera singer from the director of the Boston Lyric Opera, who was just amazing. And I have to say, when one of the kids at the end of the presentation asked her to sing for us and she threw back her head and sang, I thought, well, there's another thing like running 52 miles that I can't possibly do. So just really good opportunities for the kids to be learning about a lot of that. And one of them, which was very interesting, we had Priscilla Douglas come, who was formerly the Secretary of Economic Affairs in Massachusetts. And she then invited me, and if you haven't seen this, I really urge you to do it. It's just a walk by. She is friends with a sculptor who created an enormous piece of art that is now on display at King's Chapel. It's called, and it is really a testament to a reflection, a thought piece on the members of the King's Chapel, which is right across the street from the Parker House on Tremont Street, that owned slaves. And just this really unbelievable piece of art that she's done. It's a woman who's sitting with a bird cage and opening the bird cage and letting those birds loose. So the sculptor came on Friday night to talk about the significance of that. It is at such a busy corner right there that you can't possibly miss it, but it is truly, truly beautiful. So, and we're going to be getting that out to the kids as well for them to be thinking about that. Today we have two wonderful speakers, and I'm going to turn right to our first speaker. Jacqueline Bowman is the executive director of Greater Boston Legal Services, and she's served in that role since 2011. And she's responsible for the overall management and operations of that organization. And anyone who's ever heard me talk about my legal career knows that Greater Boston Legal Services holds a special place in my heart. When I was an intern at Emmanuel, when I was a student at Emmanuel College, I interned at Greater Boston in the Fields Corner office, and then went on to stay there through my senior year of college and when I started in law school. And it is truly God's work that they are doing there every day, like so many of us with very stretched resources and being in the community providing services. And Jacqueline began working there as a senior attorney, then became the managing attorney of the family law unit. She left there briefly in 1991 to work at Mass Law Reform, which is the state support attorney for family and juvenile law matters. And by 1998, she was back at Greater Boston Legal Services, first as an associate director and then as the deputy director. She is a nationally recognized expert in both family and juvenile law, as well as in law practice management. She serves on the Access to Justice Commission of the Supreme Judicial Court. She serves on a number of boards, doing that service we talk about for the kids, for nonprofit organizations. And most recently, she was honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Massachusetts Black Lawyers Association. So congratulations on that.
Thank
And
you.
Jacqueline, thanks for being here with us this morning.
Thanks for inviting me. So I should say I'm no longer on Access to Justice Commission. After 20 years, it's time to roll off and let somebody else do it. But I'm still involved with their Racial Justice Subcommittee and presenting a program next Tuesday on consumer debt and how it impacts communities that have been marginalized. So folks should look that up on the A to J website and attend that session if you can. Greater Boston Legal Services was founded in 1900. So we are just past celebrating our 125th year. It was founded in order to provide services to marginalized communities, which at that time were immigrants and women whose partners left them and left them with the kids. And so it was founded in order to make sure that these vulnerable populations would not be harmed by unscrupulous attorneys and other folks. And that has been our sort of mission and legacy since then. We today provide services to people who are very low income, under 125% of the federal poverty level, which translates to roughly $41,000 a year for a family of four. So that's very, very low income. And we provide comprehensive legal services. We sort of like look at ourselves kind of like a law firm for low income communities, but we also pride ourselves as being a social justice organization focused on racial justice uh, and fairness in the justice system. So we not only represent people directly in various different kinds of legal issues, and I'll talk about what those are in a few minutes, but we also look at systemic issues. What are some of the things that are keeping people in poverty or making it difficult for people to uh, meet their basic needs? And looking at those kinds of things, we do things like rarely these days do we do class actions, but we do a couple of class actions. We do a lot of administrative advocacy and legislative advocacy, but mostly we work with our community partners in creating change in those communities. So in recent times, we've been doing a lot of work around supporting immigrants in our community, many of whom are here under color of law. Either they have a temporary protective status or some other status to be here and to work here. But all of that has created confusion within the communities because of the various different executive orders. And as a result, a number of people are afraid, and things are happening that I'm sure that most of you have heard about, where people are accosted on the street and being told to go back to their country, or um, being told that the neighbor is going to call ICE on them. So things have gotten really tense, and it's been really, really difficult for these vulnerable communities to actually show up. And GBLS is trying to help in a wide range of areas. Our sort of core work and core priorities are we have a consumer rights unit which focuses on predatory lending, foreclosures, loan modifications, and just recently we started working on air property issues. In the South, uh, air property was very prevalent because, people owned property passed down from grandma to mom and dad and then to child, and no one ever did anything about switching the title. So there was a lot of legal work being done in the South around air property, particularly after the various different hurricanes and other natural disasters happened, and that was a barrier, making it difficult for people to get help from FEMA. In Massachusetts, because property is so expensive, um, a lot of people didn't own property. But when we look at certain neighborhoods, Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, for example, there is a lot of property that was owned by previous generations. And again, a daughter came in to help grandma, and grandma passed, and the daughter continued to stay in the house and doesn't have title. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is work with people to clear title, because we feel like with the predatory lending going on, lots of things are happening and people are ending up losing their houses through various different liens being pressed on them, and not being able to prove that they have title so that they can go get a mortgage, or they can go get a loan to help fix up the property and to do the things that you would normally do in order to take care of your home. So that's a burgeoning area that we are working in, and we're concentrating on communities where there are vulnerable folks, low income people. We find that is the sort of like shoulder for the communities. the more people who have um, property in a particular community, the more that they can sort of help that community stabilize. So that's one of the reasons that we're doing that work. We also have a CORI clinic, a criminal record clinic, and that clinic was started in 1997 when Massachusetts was focused on reentry and helping citizens reenter successfully in society. And so, one of the things that we found is that not having a clear CORI interfered with people's ability to get housing and to get jobs. And so, we focused on doing what we could to help people have clean records and also to be able to get a job or to get housing. We also worked on juvenile record sealing too, because I mean, people were doing, juvenile activities as kids, and when they became adults, it became a barrier for them, particularly in some instances where these things were showing up on a record, even though they may not have been found involved, but the arrest might show up on a record. So helping to seal those records and to give them a good start in society. We also have an education program which we started called School to Prison Pipeline Intervention Project. And what we found was that kids were ending up in the juvenile justice system for a wide range of things. I mean, almost none of it was serious matters. And, like maybe yelling back at a teacher, getting involved in a fight with classmates, but their education was getting disrupted, and many of them did not return to school and would be on the streets and would get involved in adult criminal justice. And so we felt like if there was a way that we could get involved in the school systems to kind of slow down the rate of suspension, encourage schools to provide appropriate education to students, that we would be able to disrupt that pipeline and help kids understand that there's an alternative to uh, criminal lifestyle. So we started our education school to prison pipeline program, and we represent a significant number of kids who are facing suspension from school. And that has been a very successful program, particularly in Boston, working with the Boston public school systems and setting up guidelines. We were hearing stories about kids as young as kindergarten and first grade who were being suspended from school. And in those situations, it was mostly kids who had disabilities or special needs. Suspending them from school is not the way to help kids understand the importance of education. I don't know if you remember back when you were a kid, if you were out of school, it was like, yay. And even the reason for being suspended from school didn't really, resonate with kids, and particularly not kids that young. Um, and so we've been successful in coming up with guidelines, which we hope will spread across the state in order to come up with alternatives when kids are not behaving appropriately in the classroom. Because we also recognize the burden on teachers. Class sizes are quite large, and teachers end up having to do a lot more than just simply teach. And so sometimes it's easier to get the bad actor out of the classroom, but trying to get folks to understand the impact of just removing a kid who's acting out and how that can have negative impacts for the rest of that child's life. We also, harkening back to our origins, we do a lot of family law. And I think that's where we sort of interact a lot with staff from the DA's office. We represent people who have been victimized by domestic violence largely, but we also do legal assistance for people who are victims of crime. Um, there we do, largely family law related matters, helping people get restraining orders, dealing with custody issues. But we also do some victim witness kinds of things, helping people to navigate the criminal justice system. Uh, I would say that most of the cases are though those connected with partner abuse and making sure that people have protective orders and that their kids are protected. We also, within that group, also handle some care and protection type matters. And although that's a very small percentage of the cases, we work closely with CPCS in doing that. And we have a model where we have an attorney, a parent advocate, and a social worker working as a team in order to help families stay together. Uh, and that's the sort of goal. What kinds of services do people need in order to protect the kids and then make sure that they're not neglected? We don't generally handle kids who have been abused in those situations. It's mostly neglect as a result of poverty. We also do a lot of government benefits work. You've probably heard of the various different attacks now from the federal side on recipients of public benefits and sort of restricting the people who can get uh, benefits, sort of like assuming that people who are receiving Medicaid or people who are receiving SNAP benefits are basically sitting around doing nothing. Excuse me. But most of these people are either disabled themselves or taking care of people who are disabled. We're taking care of young children. And when you talk to many of these people, they would love to have a job. They would love to be able to get out and make the money that they need in order to cover their basic needs. But there are barriers to preventing them from doing that. So we represent people who are facing, barriers in applying for those services and trying to make sure that the federal regs uh, don't so narrow the field that people are not going to be able to get their basic needs met. Um, there's this sort of misbelief that in the Reagan welfare queen concept, and that doesn't really exist. And if you've worked with any people within the low income communities, you know that they're trying to do the best that they can with the limited resources that they have. And for us in the greater Boston area, that's really a lot. I mean, even if somebody was working full time, making minimum wage, Massachusetts minimum wage, they still would not be able to really afford a two-bedroom apartment in the greater Boston area. And so people are trying to do what they can in order to meet those needs. And it's really challenging because of the cost of living in our area, and particularly the cost of housing. We do a lot of housing work, and we've focused on public housing um, because once people lose a voucher, it is really, really hard for them to get back into affordable housing. And so we work to make sure that people are getting the services that they should get and doing the things that they need to do in order to preserve those vouchers. We concentrate on the sort of big cities. And one of the things I didn't mention is that our main office is in Boston on Friend Street, but we also have an office in Cambridge. Um, it used to be Cambridge and Somerville Legal Services, but back in 1997, we absorbed the Cambridge office, primarily because of the cuts in the federal funding. And that was the year that GBLS gave up the federal funds. And we now rely on state funds, but foundations and various different grants and foundations. Um, our Cambridge office had been handling the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic. And one of the restrictions that was placed on federal funding in 1997 was the inability to represent undocumented residents. And because that was part and parcel of our beginning and what I refer to as being part of our DNA, um, that also led to our decision in part to give up the federal funds. And Cambridge and Somerville Legal Services made the same decision, but they would not have been able to operate on their own because the funding cut that they received was significantly higher. And so they merged into GBLS, and we continue to operate Cambridge office. They still refer to themselves as Castles, but they've been part of GBLS for almost 30 years. The Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic has moved downtown, and we provide those services out of the Boston office. In terms of immigration, as I said, we've been doing immigration services since 1900. Um, Today, a lot of those services sort of based on people seeking asylum, escaping from countries where they've been victimized in their countries, um, and have come to the United States for relief. It's been really, really difficult these last few months because people are afraid to come out of their houses, even if they are here under color of law. And that's been really challenging for my staff, uh, not knowing from day to day who's the targeted community. We would do clinics around the state, basically telling people what their rights are. And we help particularly this latest group at TPS, the Haitian community, to apply for temporary protective status and to get work authorizations. And for many of them, that's how they become known to ICE. And with the attempted expiration of the temporary protective status, ICE knows where people live. And people have been really afraid and have not been exercising their other rights, like sending their kids to school or going to the doctors or even showing up at courthouses because they're afraid of what might happen. And the stories and the rumors are sort of rampant. People showing up for their interviews um, at the DHS facilities and then being taken into custody. So it's been really challenging. And in many instances, these people are represented by counsel, and their counsel might show up, and then there's not a lot that they can do. Massachusetts is a great state. Our legislature has provided some funds in order to help support this particular community and to provide them with access to counsel. So beyond GBLS, a number of other private attorneys and other entities, including CPCS, are providing services to the immigrant community in order to help them exercise their rights. We also do a low-income tax clinic uh, where we help people who have low income um, deal with tax consequences. A number of the people that we help and support are, small business owners and self-employed people. And I think people don't really understand the self-employment tax, um, and end up owing quite a bit of money because they have not paid that particular tax. Um, as employees, our employer pays a part of the share of the Social Security and Medicare uh, part, but as self-employed, you're supposed to pay the entire thing. And I think that people are confused about that. And we get a lot of small business owners and self-employed people who are running into issues because they've not paid that part of the tax. We also end up with a number of spousal claims where the partner has done something, filed for IRS or not paid taxes and signed the other partner's name. And so we do a lot of spousal protection in those kinds of cases as well. So that's the sort of broad sweep of what we do. We have some specialty groups. For example, we have an Asian Outreach Center. And the Asian Outreach Center was started over 50 years ago in order to support Chinese Americans to deal with the justice system, but it's expanded now to provide services to a wider range of people of Asian descent, and sort of came into its own, shortly after the pandemic, when there was a lot of focus on Asian hate and working with the communities. And that has sort of enabled us to sort of, fast forward to today, where there's a lot of racism and hate speech going around affecting a number of communities, and particularly communities where people are presumed to be undocumented. And so we do a lot of know your rights kinds of clinics. We do a lot of work with our community partners to help people understand what their rights are. We don't do discrimination cases. I mean, early on in our history, we used to do some racial discrimination cases, but we don't have the resources to do those cases. They're not quick cases, and they tend to require a lot of effort. We used to work very closely with the Fair Housing uh, organization, but they've since have disbanded, and now the work is sort of spread among a number of different entities. Um, I've said a lot. I've talked a lot. I don't know if people have questions.
Jackie,
Questions, comments?
I have
Alice?
a quick question. Jackie, what did you say when you were talking about the efforts to deal with kids getting suspended in school? Are those recommendations that were made? What was that end result of that work?
Well, we filed a lawsuit against the Boston Public Schools, and then we negotiated a settlement
Okay.
where the school agreed to a set of steps that they would take before suspending children from
Okay.
school.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Eddie, excuse me, Jackie, have you been involved at all with, we had a speaker a few months ago talking about their efforts at the registry to get rid of a lot of the very discriminatory language in deeds. Have you been involved in that at all, or?
I have not personally been
Yeah,
involved in it, but yes, our staff have been involved in that. Um, it's the way in which we kind of historically have described people with challenges. Um, so we're trying to, you know, speak about, instead of saying a disabled person, people with disabilities.
Hmm.
Um, and trying to improve that language, because when you look at the uh, statutes beyond the registry in Massachusetts, it's sort of riff with various different kinds of language that is not acceptable in today's world. It's a slow process, and I think one that requires a lot of education because, if you're not part of that community, it can be really, really challenging sometimes to try to figure out, well, what is the appropriate language to use. One of the things I didn't say, and it's been a 30-year, almost a 30-year process, is GBLS sued the MBTA. And one of the reasons that we ended up suing the MBTA back in 1990, 95, 96 is because we were working with the Boston Center for Independent Living, and people were complaining because they were trying to get to work and the kneeling buses would not stop for them. The drivers just didn't want to have to deal with people using wheelchairs. And so we got involved in that. discovered that the challenges with the MBTA went much further than the kneeling buses. People riding the T, if they were either blind or deaf or hard of hearing, couldn't really tell what stop they were at because there were no announcements and there were no visual signs. And so for all of you who ride the T today, and you hear the announcements arriving at, Alewife, it is thanks to that lawsuit
Wow.
that you can now see it and hear it. The other thing that was a result of the lawsuit that we brought against the T was that they now do announcements when the escalators and elevators are out, because people who had mobility issues would get off at, Back Bay or something and not be able to uh, uh, get out because they couldn't use the elevator or the escalators. So now there are these announcements that are made that, the elevator is out at, Central Square. Please use, and they'll tell you what the alternative methods are for you to be able to get out. But that's something that we did, and that also led to conversations, not a lawsuit, but conversations with groups such as the Mass General Hospital Partners Health to improve services to people with disabilities. It used to be that, certain people weren't weighed properly in order to get the appropriate medication that they needed because they were using wheelchairs, and hospitals and health centers had no equipment to deal with that. And we, had to educate them that that was discrimination.
All right. Jacqueline, thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And if there are any questions, feel free to just shoot me an email or give me a call. I'm generally available.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to leave now. Hope
Thank you.
that's not a problem.
Turning to our next topic, you may have seen an article that appeared in the Boston Globe a couple of weeks ago that talked about the significant maternal health disparities that exist here in Massachusetts, which would be shocking anyway, but seem particularly shocking given what we think of as how wonderful our healthcare and innovations are here. And the article talked about the differences seen where patients are white versus patients who are Black, Hispanic, Asian, or publicly insured. For instance, Black women in Massachusetts consistently have a much higher rate of delivering by cesarean section. And not only do they have a higher rate, but it has increased pretty dramatically. It was at 31% in 2019, and it is now up to 39%, or it was at 39 in 2024. And that is concerning because there is so much higher risk of complications when you deliver by C-section. And correspondingly, not only are Black women having more C-sections, but they're having more birth complications. In 2024, Governor Healey signed the maternal health law, which expanded prenatal and postpartum care options and extended mass health coverage for doulas. And that's a step forward in helping women be ready to give birth, and then in the postpartum period, getting better care. So I'm very happy to have Cheyenne Bell with us today to talk about this and to help us think about how we can better be supporting prospective mothers and new mothers in our communities. Cheyenne has spent most of her life learning about different areas of the medical field, and she eventually realized that she had a real passion for something so fun and so amazing, which is delivering babies. And she decided that becoming a doula would be a way to take that passion and put it into practice. And she believes that every birth is special and unique, and that women really deserve extra support and encouragement. And if they need something more than that, they should be able to get that. And as a Black doula, she understands the disparity in maternal health outcomes in various populations of women and is able to advocate for her patients based on her knowledge of the system, the healthcare system, and the understanding that everybody comes to that moment of delivering a baby with different needs and requiring different levels of support. So Cheyenne, I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mariana. I love the intro. I feel so loved. That's so beautiful. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me and to be a part of this conversation. I love talking about these things. So as Marian said, I'm Cheyenne. I am a birth and postpartum doula and the founder of Haven Place Doulas here in the greater Boston area. And also, as Marian kind of alluded to, I was featured in the Boston Globe article that recently came out. And I'm really grateful about being a part of this conversation. But before I show the video, because I requested a video to be shared, I want to invite everyone to this conversation a little differently. I want to make this a little bit of little interactive, nothing too formal, nothing complicated. And you don't have to say anything out loud if you don't want to, but just to kind of ground us, by a show of hands, how many people in this room are parents? Okay, Marianne, Alice, Christina. Okay, some parents in the room. Shout out to the parents. Um, and how many of you have supported someone through birth, either as a partner, a family member, friend? How many of you have been a part of that experience? Okay, I see Marianne and Stephanie again. Awesome, awesome. So some of you have an idea on this lens already, not necessarily in a professional capacity, but as someone who has experienced or either witnessed care in real time. So as you watch this video, I want you to hold both of those perspectives. I'm not asking you to evaluate this clinically. I just want you to pay attention to what feels off, what feels delayed, what feels like it could have been handled differently, and just notice your reaction. This video may be triggering for some people, so I would recommend, if you have your volume all the way up on your Zoom, to lower it down a little bit because the mother does get loud. And some of you may have already seen this video, but this is what bias in healthcare can look like in real time. And I'm not sure who's going to cue the video, but please do. Thanks, Megan.
Can you guys all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Megan, are you sharing audio? Mm.
Technology is not our friend today.
Indeed. I was just gonna say, let me see.
I had trouble getting, we've had all kinds of trouble today.
No, that's okay. Let me see if maybe I can try
Oh,
to
I'm
share.
sorry.
It's all right, no worries.
No worries. Technology is always technology. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yep,
Okay. Hopefully the audio is going to work. Apologies, everyone.
that's okay.
All right.
Still can't hear it.
But
Oh
that's good.
gosh. Sorry, everyone.
It's
Share
okay.
settings.
That's okay. And I could speak to it too if we don't.
Oh, I apologize. Let's see.
Do we wanna, Cheyenne, I don't wanna have you lose time. Do you wanna keep going and we'll keep working on this? Does that make sense? Or does that mess you up?
You're muted, Cheyenne.
Sorry. Um, no, a little bit, but it's okay. I can make it work. I can
Alright.
kind of speak to the video.
Alright,
We can't get
we'll
into
see
that's
if we can figure that out.
yeah, that's perfectly fine. I've seen it enough times where I can speak to what's happening in there, and I can kind of
Mm.
just give you guys a little walkthrough for those who may not have seen it.
Okay.
But this mother here, she arrived in the emergency department in labor, and what we're kind of seeing is the initial process of how intakes kind of happen when a patient presents to the ER in labor. And this mother, she's very vocal, as you can see her moving in in her chair about the pain and contractions that she is feeling. And the nurse that's sitting there who's taking her is kind of very I wouldn't say nonchalant, but very focused on the process, asking her questions. What's your due date? When are you who's your doctor? You know, how many kids have you had before? Like these kind of taking her through this while the mother is kind of getting in and out of the chair and vocalizing. Things are moving a lot faster or at least uncomfortable for her. And towards the end of the video, there's whoever's recording it, maybe a family member, kind of is stating, you know, when you knew you were giving birth at this hospital, you should have went somewhere else. You know how things go here. People talk about this all the time, kind of. That's kind of the gist of the video. So I know you guys weren't able to kind of fully see what happened in the video, but some of the things that I think are really important to call out is there is nothing necessarily wrong with how the nurse did her job, um, because she followed the process that was expected of her in this particular scenario. She did what the protocols call for in her role. But the issue isn't about her following protocol. It's about how she responded to the mother who was in active labor. And while I can't speak to all the specific details of this particular case because we only have a snapshot of what was going on at the time, what I can speak to is the patterns that I've seen repeatedly in my work. So again, on paper, the questions she was asking the mother were appropriate, and the process was standard of how we typically would see some of these things show up when moms present to the ER. However, in moments like this, it's not just about what you do that matters, it's when you do it and whether you see the person in front of you clearly enough to respond. So when urgency is delayed and context is ignored, the outcome isn't neutral, it's inequitable. So this video clip here, if you are able to see it at some point, it wasn't a routine moment, the way the process flowed, excuse me. The woman, she was in active labor, invisible pain, saying her baby is coming, saying she felt her baby in her bottom. And instead of urgency in that particular moment, she got process. She sat there for 30 minutes in that wheelchair with the nurse going through process. And those 30 minutes, she could have already been on the laboring floor. She could have already had her care started to what she needed. And about 12 minutes after this interaction, when she finally made it upstairs, she gave birth to her baby. So the issue isn't about whether or not the questions that the nurse was asking her were appropriate. It's about why process was prioritized over a person in a moment that clearly required urgency. And another really important piece of that video that you guys didn't get to hear, but that I kind of quoted, there was a voice in the background who was saying to her, when you found out you were birthing here, you should have switched hospitals. And that says a lot, because we're not talking about just this one moment with this one patient. We're talking about an expectation. Communities who already believe they know what kind of care they're going to receive before they ever even walk through the door. And that doesn't come from nowhere. That comes from patterns. that comes from lived experiences. And when experiences like that happen over time, they don't just stay as isolated moments. They shape behavior, they create a kind of risk awareness, what some might even call a risk aversion, where people aren't just showing up to give birth, they're showing up to try to avoid harm. And over time, advocacy stops being optional and it becomes protection. And I have seen that myself. I've supported 2 clients in very similar situations, both low risk, both being induced, both past their due dates. With one client, a Black woman. Her experience was more aggressive, less informed, more pressure, more urgency in decision making without a full explanation of what was going on. And with another client, a white woman, very similar clinical situation, the tone was very different. More time, more listening, more honoring of her preferences. In the same system, same hospital, same protocols, different experience. And sometimes one of the most noticeable differences is the race of the person giving birth. I didn't become a doula just because I loved birth. My first doula experience was when I was 14 with my mother and the birth of my little sister. I stepped into the role of doula and advocate without fully knowing what that meant. I was the support that she needed in that moment of vulnerability. I became a doula because I kept seeing what was happening inside the system and I couldn't unsee it. Families were walking in not fully prepared, questions going unasked or unanswered, people not feeling heard. And then I realized we ask people to advocate for themselves in one of the most physically and emotionally intense moments of their lives without ever preparing them for how the system actually works. And I often say to people, labor is one of the few times we enter into a hospital, not because something is wrong, but because something is right. And somehow it still can become a traumatic experience, not because of the body, but because of how care is delivered. As a doula, I support families through pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, which means I'm present in some of the most vulnerable, high-stake moments of their lives. I'm not seeing this from the outside. I'm in the room. I'm hearing the conversations. I'm watching how care is delivered in real time. And I always say, people will spend more time planning a vacation than they do preparing for birth and postpartum. And then we expect them to advocate for themselves in real time. And respectfully, in the middle of a contraction, that's not when someone suddenly becomes their strongest advocate. So what we do as doulas is prepare families ahead of time. We help them understand what is happening, what their options are, what questions to ask, and how to use their voice before they're in the middle of it. Because how someone is treated during birth doesn't just stay in that room, it follows them. And I want to share a different kind of moment. The same system, same environment, but this time with a client who was completely alone. And I got permission to share her story today. She was a Pakistani mom, here on her own, no family, no partner. I was her only support person in the room. She had an epidural, so she wasn't feeling any pain from her belly downwards. But during the pushing phase of her birth, she started having intense pain in her neck. And it got to the point where she physically could not push. She said it multiple times in clear English. I can't push. My neck hurts. And what she kept hearing back from her providers was, you need to push. Just push through it. You're okay. And I tried to help her by massaging her neck, applying heat packs, but she wasn't okay. She started crying, and not just a little bit, she was sobbing. And at that point, it wasn't about effort. It wasn't about willingness. She literally could not do what was being asked of her. And I remember looking at the team and saying to them, she cannot push until you address the pain she is having. Can we treat her neck so she can actually do what you're asking her to do? Because we needed her. She was the one who had to do the work of bringing her baby into the world. And in that moment, I had to be honest. I was very frustrated. And I spoke up more firmly than I usually would have. And there was a part of me right after I said it to the team that thought, did I just cross the line? Am I going to get removed from this room? Because if I got removed from the room, then she would have been completely alone in a system she wasn't familiar with, in a country she wasn't from, in one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. But they finally listened to her. They gave her something for the pain. We were able to help her settle, help her refocus. And once that pain was addressed, she was able to push and she delivered her baby. And afterward, the doctor actually said to me, "Thank you for advocating for her." And then I remember thinking, that shouldn't have required advocacy. She said she was in pain. That should have been enough. But that moment right there is what doula support can look like. Not taking over, not replacing medical care, but making sure that when someone says something isn't right, they're actually heard before it becomes a bigger problem. And I want to be clear, I didn't fix the system in that moment. What I did was help create space for her to be heard before something became a bigger issue. And that is the biggest difference support can make. At Haven Place Doulas, we prepare our clients for the system they're walking into. We don't just show up, we equip them. We teach them their rights, their options, how to advocate for themselves, and how to recognize when something doesn't feel right. And sometimes that includes having honest conversations about patterns we've seen, not to create fear, but to create informed decision making. And I want to say something else clearly. Doulas are not the solution to the maternal health crisis, but we are an important layer of support within it. We are a bridge. We are an added layer of protection, and yet we still face challenges in our work because we're entering into a system that we're entering into an already existing system that was not designed for everyone. We can help families navigate that system more safely, but we cannot fix a system that goes beyond our scope. And that responsibility shouldn't be placed on us as doulas. And I say this as someone who's not only doing the work on the parent advocacy side, but also in the policy and advocacy work in Massachusetts. I'm one of the co-leads for the Massachusetts Doula Coalition, where we've worked alongside other organizations to help draft and support legislation around doula access, kind of what Marian had introduced in the beginning. We were a part of that work. We helped in what coverage should look like through Mass Health for Doula Services. We were part of those initial conversations. And now we're also a part of the ongoing work to expand that coverage, because while progress has been made, there's still more work to do. So when I talk about this, I'm not just talking about what I've seen in the room, but I'm also working to be a part of the change that's happening outside of it. And I do want to speak to directly everyone in this room, because groups like this task force have a role to play in what happens next. And I didn't have the time to necessarily know what the role each of you play in this room and in your day-to-day work. However, there is tangible ways that you can help in supporting this work. And that includes supporting legislation that expands access to doula care by reaching out to your local legislators, which some of you could potentially be on this call, I don't know, your representatives, your senators, and voicing support for that kind of legislation. Those calls, those emails, those letters that you send out, they carry weight. There's also an opportunity for you to collaborate as well. Task force like this can bring visibility to these types of issues, partner with community-based organizations, and advocate for policies that protect patient autonomy, including the right to continuous support during birth, also known as doulas. Because while Massachusetts has high rates of insurance coverage, access to this kind of support is not equitable. And it's important to say that respectful care should not be something patients have to bring with them. It should be built into the system they are entering. So if we're serious about addressing bias, we have to look at how systems are structured, who has access to support, and what protections are actually in place for patients in real time. Because that moment that we started with, the woman in the video that you guys weren't able to see, but she honestly didn't need anything extraordinary. All she needed was some urgency, some recognition, and to be believed. And the truth is, bias doesn't always look like hate. Sometimes, like in the video, it looks like delay. Sometimes it looks like dismissal. Sometimes it looks like someone not being taken seriously until it's almost too late. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that these experiences don't necessarily define every single provider in every single hospital, but the patterns are consistent enough that they require attention. So if we're going to talk about anti-bias work in our communities, we have to include the spaces where it shows up quietly and with real consequences. And maternal health is one of those spaces. Thank you. Mm. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Yes, yeah, Reverend Lloyd here. Thank you so much for your presentation. I guess I'm struck by um, the power differential that's in this here space and time.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of work you do is on one side of in terms of trying to empower mothers to be into coming in this situation, try to educate them what the possibilities are, the questions, issues of justice, what have you. And even with knowledge itself, it's not enough because you're in a vulnerable situation. So you play a very crucial role. And what I find in dealing with folk about these kinds of moments, even, and it's not just an issue of education, because I deal with some folk who, very educated. They get in that scenario, and what's happened is that there is this failure on the part of the health system, namely the doctors and nurses, as you say, to hear them. And it's literally a power play going on there. All right, argument and what have you. No, this is what you, and there are assumptions that are made. The other part, though, is the concern about what we're doing on the other side of the scale in terms of changing the environment and learning curve for doctors and nurses. Because, you can't do one without the other. And that's my big concern right now, because, what are we changing up in terms of education for doctors and nurses that are in this scenario? So we can level the playing field a little bit better. So you do a little of that advocacy or not? What do you know?
So the work that I'm focusing more so is on the rights of the patients per se. I'm not directly involved in the medical training. That's a whole
Okay.
other beast of a different color.
Yeah.
But to your point, that is where it needs to start. If we want to see a bigger change in these systems, is we have to start in the medical schools where they're getting their foundation information. And then throughout their whole entire education, especially those that go into obstetrics, for example, at least that's the one that I have the most interest in, that they have more robust experiences where one thing I think that's being done, I don't know if it's still being done, but one option at Tufts Medical School is that the OB residents have the option to be a doula for a semester of time for the patients there, which I think is an amazing thing. Now, I don't know if it's still actively happening, but I heard about it last year, and I thought that's a great way to give these doctors, new doctors, a different look at birth from our lens as doulas. And I wonder if that could be helpful in all medical schools of people who are going towards OB to do a semester as a doula, to not be providing medical support, but more emotional, mental support and things along those lines that we do. But that's a talk we talk about a lot in as part of the coalition. We talk a lot about where the changes needs to happen there. And then of course we have these bias trainings and racial discrimination trainings that the providers are all required to do, but they do them and yet they're not really showing up in their work. These are active doctors that are working, doing, life-changing work, but we're not seeing that these trainings that they're requiring them to do are actually impacting experiences. And I think that's all I really know on that regard of the training aspect.
Thanks.
Great question. And then I saw in the chat, Lydia mentioned she saw the video, which it's a really hard thing to watch. So if you do see it, it's very moving. And thank you, Mary, I'm glad it impacted you.
Anybody else? And thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Anybody have anything else that they want to share or advertise or let us know about? Seeing none. All right. Thank you all for being with us this morning. We'll see you next month. Thank
All
you.
right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.